I was passed a referral letter about 20 years ago relating to a patient who had lost the ability to visualize. And this occurred following a cardiac procedure. So he had a coronary angioplasty procedure to dilate his coronary vessels because of ischemic heart disease. And following this procedure, he found that he could no longer visualize, having previously been a vivid visualizer. So he previously visualized faces of friends and family to help himself get to sleep. He enjoyed visualizing places he'd been. When he read a novel, he would find himself inhabiting a visual world. If he lost his keys, he might be able to visualize where he'd put them until this event, until his visualization abruptly ceased. And I thought this was an intriguing symptom. It wasn't one that I'd ever come across before. And he turned out to be a very delightful, articulate, highly intelligent guy. He'd worked as a surveyor, and he was very happy to participate in a series of assessments. And we established that he was really functioning very normally in all respects, neuropsychologically, cognitively, except that he described this very clear, abrupt change in his experience. And incidentally, he was able to give quite good visual descriptions, so he could tell me what Edinburgh Castle looked like, and he could answer questions like, which is darker, the green of grass or the green of a pine tree? So he knew quite a lot about how things looked, but he said he couldn't see them, he just knew. And we ended up doing a brain imaging study in which we asked him to look at famous faces, but also to visualize them. And when he looked at the famous faces, his brain activation was just like average brain activation, the brain activation of people who can visualize. When we look at famous faces, we activate visual regions of the brain, of course, and particularly areas which play a special role in face recognition, like something called the fusiform face area, which sits on the undersurface of your temporal lobe. But when he tried to visualize faces, he failed to activate these regions, or he activated them much less strongly than people with imagery. So imagery is, in a sense, a kind of echo of perception. When you visualize something, you tend to activate, if you have imagery, you tend to activate those brain regions which you use when you're looking at those things, but you do so more weakly. He activated these areas very weakly, indeed more weakly than people with imagery. So we thought we'd find an interesting correlate, if you like, to the change he described in his experience, something that, a change on brain imaging that might help to explain the change in his experience. So I thought this was an interesting case. We wrote a scientific paper about it. That was published. I didn't expect too much more to happen. But an American science journalist called Carl Zimmer picked the story up and wrote an article in Discover magazine about the patient, who we called MX. And then over the next few years, about 20 people got in touch saying, we're just like MX, but we always have been. We've always recognized that there's something a little bit different about us. When other people talk about last year's holiday or their loved ones, they seem to have an experience that we just can't access. And we responded to these contacts by sending people a vividness questionnaire. So essentially the kind of slightly more elaborate version of the Apple test. And they all scored right down at the very low end on that test. And then we asked a series of fairly common sense questions like, how did you discover? What emotional impact did it have? Is your memory of your personal past normal? We thought that might be affected by loss of imagery. Do you dream visually? And so on. So we built up a picture of these folk, and it seemed that they were telling a reasonably consistent story. So we thought that it would be a nice idea to write a description of them as a group, but we needed a name to describe this phenomenon, because up till then there hadn't been one. There were a few terms used in the neurological literature because individual cases have been described over the years of people who'd lost imagery having previously had it, but these were very kind of clunky terms like defective revisualization or visual irreminiscence, which we didn't think were user-friendly. So I consulted a chum of mine who knows about classical languages, and he said, why don't you borrow Aristotle's term for the mind's eye, which is Aphantasia, and tag an A onto the end. So that was how the term Aphantasia was born, like lack of the mind's eye. And words are quite powerful things, sort of powerful thought tools, and this term caught on, the press liked it, so it was quite widely reported, and the 20 cases which I'd encountered initially turned over the next few years into many thousands of cases. I shouldn't really say cases because I don't think this is a disorder, but examples. And I guess now I've probably had about 20,000 contacts mostly from people like you at the low end of the imagery spectrum with aphantasia, but a fair number from people with hyperphantasia who have very vivid imagery, who I think are extremely interesting too. So that's a thumbnail sketch of the story.